what do you do with the other kind of cultural products, which is to say, more broadly, I wouldn't say not utilitarian, but more broadly utilitarian ones involved in structuring the self-conception of a society. And the second assumption is that both in China and elsewhere, two of these very prominent cultural tools in the ancient world were mythology and divination. So that we see a lot of evidence of that in both of them in ancient Greece and Rome. We see them in all the Mediterranean societies we know anything about. They have both myths and fortune-telling of one kind or another, and a lot of others too. I'm just focusing on these two, right? You could talk about magic, you could talk about sort of talismanic stuff, you could talk about astrology, things like that, right? All of them, I'm just in a very simple way, various ways coexisting of relating to unseen forces, and unseen in the broadest sense too, meaning not only possible spiritual beings or forces, but also things that are unseen in the present, like the past or the future. Okay, so how to orient oneself, frame human existence, provide clues for optimizing human actions. Again, this might be a very simple-minded way of putting it, and I'm very open to further nuance on that. But what I want to get to, the reason for framing it this way, is that it seems to me interesting that when you get given those two premises, when you reach moments in culture where some cultural technology starts to seem unwieldy or obsolete, or is a newer way of fulfilling its same goals is stumbled upon, you have several alternatives. One of them is just to dump and replace it. So that's kind of like the typewriter case, right? Well, typewriters were good for their time. Now we've got a better way to do it. Nobody bothers with them anymore. But you could also look at the way, say, Plato thinks about myth this way, right? Which is to say, when there's a critique made and say, well, we used to try to understand the world this way, or the Homeric epics, a picture of the mythical world, but we got to change it. We got to reform it, or we got to maybe just throw it out. You might say the Confucians also, to some extent. There's probably a lot of mythological content that is dumped, and I said replaced, and there what I have in mind is, Plato tries to come up with new myths, right? Says, here's a better myth. I'm going to make one up. How about this one? And I heard this somewhere, maybe, right? And the Confucians do it a little bit. They talk about cultural heroes. They give you origin stories about, the invention of agriculture and writing and whatnot, right? I would put those in the category of what I'm calling myth in the narrative sense. I'll say more about that in a minute. Another thing you can do with that old stuff, maybe this is closer to the typewriter thing, is just ignore them. So you don't mention them anymore. Nobody cares about them. You may have a typewriter sitting in your attic, but you don't have to critique the typewriter. It's just not relevant to what you're doing, right? And I would say that, interestingly, the Confucians, given what is probably the case for the amount of mythology that may have been circulating in the times of the compilation of the early Confucian texts, this was more the Confucian approach to myth. It's out there. It doesn't concern us. It's some kind of Minjian thing, right? That nobody bothers. It's not part of what we're doing at all. We don't need to criticize it. We don't need to adapt it. Interestingly, you don't really see much about divination in Plato. Just to continue that kind of or in Aristotle, let's say, right? In fact, the Western philosophical tradition just doesn't have much to say about it, except either to critique it in religious contexts, you will see that in theological contexts, or simply to ignore it. We have other ways of pursuing our agenda. But there's a third way, and this is the reinterpretation way, and this is really the one I want to focus on. And this seems to me to happen in both cases. This is the main one I want to talk about, is that the Confucians actually pick up this old, obsolete, kind of embarrassing technology, namely divination, and they reinterpret it. That it comes a particular moment when this thing that seemed ridiculous and obsolete is now regarded as having some deep hidden significance. And of course, the same thing happens, this is sort of the starting point of this talk, in the way, let's say, Plotinus treats Greek myth. Okay, Neoplatonists treat Greek myth, right? They say, you know what? yeah, those myths contain the deepest truth. Let me tell you about Kronos and Zeus and da-da-da-da-da, right? These are all no longer critiqued in the way Plato might have done, but now reinterpreted as actually containing the deepest truths. You could look at the way the Christians handled the Old Testament in a similar way, right? Don't take it literally, but it turns out this is the most important thing in the world, right? It looks terribly offensive or embarrassing, but we're going to give you the key to interpreting it. So sort of the question here is why, I can't think of another example where it seems that the reinterpretation of mythology in the broad sense is sort of the more commonplace phenomenon. Whereas in the case of early China, for some reason, the choice was made, or it happened to go that way, that divination was the thing that was singled out to be reinterpreted rather than discarded or ignored. So I was trying to think about how that might help us think about the two traditions. Again, this is a rough attempt to sort of sketch out certain characteristics of what I'm calling mythology, and maybe to help single out what exactly I mean by the term. Generally speaking, I mean narratives about the distant past and sometimes involving predictions or implications for the future, right? There's a story, basically, right? They're ideology focused, meaning they're largely origin stories. So I mentioned we have a few of them in Confucian canonical works, like Origins of Cultural Phenomena, but things like the creation of the world, things like, how did the four seasons begin or something, right? Why is the world the way it is? Why are the human relations? Why do we have these castes, or why do we have these genders, or why do we have whatever we've got, right? Where did it come from? Another thing about them is, they address sort of general global features of the world or the culture. Something happened long ago, this set things up in this way, and that's how it is now, for everybody now, right? Generally speaking, right? This is an overall kind of description of how things got to be the way the world is, right? Sometimes you have sort of narrative mythologies about local traditions, right? Why is this well sacred or something like that, right? And this guy dropped his eyelashes here, something happened, right? But there too, they seem to be stable once and for all events that determine the nature of this place. So there's a certain once and for all effect in generally speaking about the way the myths are structured, narratives, etiologies. One more thing, prominent role of agency as explanation. So a lot of it is gods or heroes or spirits, right? Somebody was trying to do something and got in some adventure, right? And got into some misadventure, and this thing happened, or they wanted this and they did this, right? So some intentional being, some conscious intentional beings, a spirit or a god or a hero. And that is linked structurally, I think, this is a more complicated point, but to the idea of narrative continuity, storylines, accountability, dramatic personae, right? You got to be able to track a person in a story across time, and sort of to understand the story as a story, you have to understand their intentions, right? We can talk about that, but that's my attempt to think about that. But also with that, a focus on purposes as ultimate causes. So there's intentional beings. Those intentions, those purposes are what have made the world the way they are. All right, maybe many gods, maybe spirits, maybe heroes, maybe there are counter purposes, but you want to trace things back to how they got that way. Somebody was doing something. Okay. If we go over and look at divination, again, in a very broad sense, a couple things sort of come to the eye, right? When you go to a fortune teller, so really, I want to think about the Zhouyi in the most basic way, right? As somebody going to get their fortune told. Of course, we know about Jiaguwen, and we know, oracle bone, divination, also earliest sort of cultural artifact we have. This usually was kings asking a question of diviners, and the questions were situational, right? Something's going on. I want to do something. I have a couple of possible examples. Something like, should I attack the neighboring state? Would the proposed sacrifice please the ancestors? So they'll remove this toothache. That's a real one. Is that a good time and place to go hunting? Things like that, right? There's a thing I want to do right now, And I want to know how this will go, right? What the factors are and how they will affect this project that I'm proposing. So this makes it sort of intrinsically situational or context dependent, practical, presupposing a desired project as the framing of the questioning, local as opposed to global. The global conditions generally irrelevant or unmentioned, and the global framing unnecessary and unaddressed, right? So there's a particular thing right here and now that I in particular care about, want to do, and I want to know how that's going to fit in or what will happen to this project. Ever-changing results, no need for global consistency. So, I can go to the fortune teller today and say, so how's my this boil on my knee going to turn out? And they say, not good. And I go tomorrow and it says, oh, it's good. That's fine. That's what it's supposed to do, right? It's supposed to change every time you go, right? It's very time and place specific. And that means a temporary relationship with the relevant unseen forces, whatever they might be. They may, I think, initially probably were spirits and gods, right? If we look at the oracle bones and tortoise divinations, a way of communicating with these spirits. But the relationship is an interesting one there because it's a temporary relationship with those forces, and the god or the spirit's agenda is secondary in a certain way, right? Because the question isn't really what does this deity or spirit want, full stop. It's what do they want that's relevant to what I want right now, right? So, it could still be a factor. It might be more easy for it to drop out of that consideration, right? Whatever the forces are, it's not the thing that frames and defines the relationship or the outcome of that divination, right? The main thing is the question that one comes with. So, again, here's my question. Assuming prior coexistence of both approaches everywhere, the question is, which ones are chosen for philosophical elaboration, reinterpretation, repurposing in light of new conceptual advances? And it seems to me, maybe uniquely, if someone knows another example, I'd be interested. In the case of maybe there's an esoteric tradition in Hermetic stuff or something like that in Europe. I'd be interested to know about that. But maybe the amount of attention and the global significance culturally of the Zhouyi is rather a unique case. For some reason, divination rather than narrative is the thing, right? That's given this attention. Now, here's where I go to those two opposed views of the role. In my opinion, just on the basis of what we have in the evidence of the way the Warring States philosophers address problems, the kinds of arguments they make, the kinds of texts they cite, it looks to me like they have almost completely sidelined the Book of Changes and Divination in serious discussion. And it's a little bit controversial. There is a school of thought that, as I said, sees this as sort of between the lines. There's one or two references in the Analects that have an alternate text that people who are fond of the Book of Changes would like to insist is the right reading, right? Where Confucius says, if only I could study the Eve for 50 more years. I don't think that reading is correct, personally. There's a textual issue, just given other things going on in that text and in contemporaneous texts. So from what I can see, of course, in the Chunqiu and the Zuozhuan, you still have people doing divination, right? But when the philosophers, what we call the Zhuzibaijia, are talking to each other, this is not a thing that they will lean on. Xunzi and people like that will quote it now and then, right? I think, but it's not. It's no longer that relevant, right? So we have a funny situation where it was very, very important culturally. This other movement arises, which seems to put it's almost like the typewriter now, right? It's just. Yeah, there's that thing, but that's not really important for what we're doing anymore, and no one would think to bring it up, okay? That's my view based on what I see in the text. As I said, there's another view, which is that everybody was obsessed with the I Ching. The Lao Tzu comes out of it. It's there, and the Confucius was studying it, and it's really at the basis of everything. I don't see much evidence for that myself. I'll come back to this a little later, but just to give you a sense, right, against the view that it is the hidden source informing, here's some things that people think maybe look to them, and you will see this in a lot of traditional commentary, such themes as timeliness, shi, right, or shi zhong, the mean, shi and zhong, interdependent pairings of dominant and recessive roles, so this kind of pairing, dyadic way of looking at relationships, fu zi, jun chen, etc., that kind of stuff. On the one hand, or origins, questions of origins, reversal, transformation, which usually are linked to things in Tao Te Ching or in the Zhuangzi. Yin-yang five phases theory, yin-yang and wuxing, also not really in evidence until rather late in the Warring States, but a little more in medicine, talking about physical processes and really dynastic change. Rather, I see the latter, all those so-called Confucian and Taoist themes, as newly developed stabs at dealing with relations to the unseen conditions of the world, with new conceptual tools developed for their own immanent philosophical and social reasons. That's a longer story. I'm not going to try to give you why I think those develop, but I don't think they come from the I Ching. Taking the place of the backburning of both myth and divination. So myth doesn't get invoked much, and neither does divination. So on this view, the famous Confucian agnosticism and skepticism extends also to divination, right? Not just to myth. But then, remarkably, somewhere near the end of the Warring States period, commentary brings divination, but not narrative mythology, back into prominence in light of these new developments as suddenly full of deep and crucial significance. What could have motivated this choice? That's the question I want to try to address. So I do think there's a connection between the prominence of the I Ching and these themes that have developed in the sort of, classical Zhuzi age, philosophical age. But I think, I'm far from convinced that the causality goes from the Zhouyi to those things. There are remaining questions about how to put the pieces together, which I'll get to later. But mainly I want to see if we can make sense of why divination and not narrative. So one thing that comes to mind here, one way at least is useful, I find useful for looking at this situation, is a challenge. And I do look at the commentarial adaptation of the Zhouyi as a Confucian work. I think that's uncontroversial, right? And I would read it so I'm talking about the Shizizhuan and the Shuohua, all these the so-called 10 wings to the I Ching, which I would view as a late Warring States or early, maybe Qin or Han work, okay? So the first stab at trying to understand this that I have found useful is to look at a challenge that was being presented. We can see it clearly in the Xunzi already, of Confucian writers responding. They're fighting, they're self-consciously responding to other schools, right? Xunzi is probably our best source for this. The Mozi's there, the legalists or proto-legalists are there, and the Taoists, so-called, right, some mention of Lao Tzu and of Zhuangzi, as having some insight and having some important things to say, but needing to be corrected through compensating things on other sides. So Xunzi famously says, right, Zhuangzi understood heaven, but he was blocked when it came to man, or ignorant when it came to man. And Lao Tzu understood retreat, but not advance, things like that, right? So all of that stuff's good, but we need to do something else. I would point also to the Xu, Jing, and Yi. This is in the bottom of this slide, when he's talking about the function of the mind. Those are very Taoist-y sounding terms. Xunzi takes them, he accepts their importance, the sort of breakthrough insight there, but he really turns them around, right? He adds to them, supplements them in a way that makes them more sort of Confucian use-friendly, right? And I would say the Zhengming Pian, maybe, as if we look at the way language is treated there in response to things going on in the Mingjia, but also I think more importantly in Zhuangzi. So, and there's another thing here. So this is item 1 on this slide, right? The privileged role, I think the role of the Tao Te Ching as a challenge that had to be responded to. One way you could put this is the privileged role of what will later be called yin. Now, I'm also of the opinion that the yin-yang structure for these things does not precede the Tao Te Ching. It's actually in formation through the Tao Te Ching. There's one significant usage there, but again, my reading of this is that those things that are kind of read back into the tradition are actually come from a development much later on. So, and in fact, sort of the discovery of the yin going on in the Tao Te Ching, we see it in these motifs of the disvalued against the valued, the feminine privileged over the masculine, the dark over the bright, the low over the high, the soft over the hard, the lacking over the present, right? The small, the empty, the indeterminate, desirelessness, namelessness, all those familiar things over their valued opposites or their determinate or intelligible or seen. This is again a seen-unseen relationship. So if you link that back to the basic problem faced by mythologies and divination. So the prioritizing of the unseen or the indeterminate or the vague, but also linked to the feminine. That, I think, was something that had to be acknowledged, or at least some thinkers within the later, sort of what we call later Confucian thinkers, wanted to take in, but also wanted to reinterpret. And you can see different approaches to that. Again, Shunzi is one of them I just mentioned. I would think you see it in some of the things like the Zhongyong, where some of those motifs are taken up and then given a tweak. I'm going to look at the motivation for adopting the I Ching as another piece of that story. Relatedly, a new interest we have in the Tao Te Ching, also in some of the excavated materials, but not much outside of that at that stage, right? Nobody really is trying to theorize the beginnings until this sort of way of regarding it. And this becomes a little more subtle also in the Tao Te Ching and related texts, Tai Sheng Shui, things like that. A related new interest in source, origin, beginnings of things. This is typically the wheelhouse of mythology, as I was saying, etiologies, right? The beginning of things in what they previously were not. So this relates to the item one there, the origin, not just the prioritizing of the dark over the light, but the origin of the light in the dark, of the masculine in the feminine, of action in stillness, right? Of being and non-being, or a presence in absence, all that kind of stuff. Those are closely related, and from there you get sort of that temporal dimension of that relationship between those value extremes to the third item, radical instability, change, reversal. In other words, origins of things from their ostensible opposites introduces us to this theme of reversal, which will be so important. So there's a kind of imminent way you can see that developing in the Tao Te Ching and related text approach. If we push that the next step, at least as I read it, into the next sort of phases of Taoist thinking, to the Zhuangzi, this becomes a problem for certain people because we start to point to a very radical kind of reversibility, instability, leading to an impossibility of determinate knowledge, and especially, moral knowledge. Right and wrong, shi and fei, have become problematized in a newly troubling way for a lot of thinkers. You can see this again in Shunzi. And hence, 5, an allegedly corrosive kind of relativism. So I think there was a reason all these things were linked together and regarded as a challenge that had to be met. And we have various approaches, right? And I want to put the I Ching story into that context. Which means an opportunity in all these cases to both incorporate, there are some that would just like deny them, right, you could say. But you could even look at the way the legalists use the Tao Te Ching, depending on what you think, how distant you think that is from other usages of it, as another thing like this, right? How do we bring this in, even strenuously advocate it, but also turn it to a purpose? Even in that case, the corrosive moral relativism can be put to good use, right, as a political factor. Okay. So how do we incorporate and neutralize, repurpose these motifs? So the first point, yin-yang, the development of yin-yang I'd like to look at as actually part of a pushback to the privileging of the avant la lettre yin in the Tao Te Ching, okay? Which is to say, something discovered there that could both adopt and accept the importance of those reversals, of change, of the back and forth relationship from light to dark, or from dark to light, from still to moving, and so on, but without the downgrading of the what will be called the yang elements to the point that would lead to this corrosive moral relativism. So let's go back to the structure of divination as a kind of proto-yin-yang structure. And again, I'm not claiming that it led to the development of yin-yang directly. I'm saying it was sort of opportunistically discovered to have the margin of opportunity to be used this way as part of this other polemical problem, okay? Right? Why would it, though? The question was, why choose this rather than mythology? Because the mythology is usually the way you fight corrosive moral relativism, right? You say, no, someone created the world and made this good and this bad, or someone created our society and decided how things are, or whatever, right? They didn't go that way. They went a different way. So now I want to just go back and look at the very structure of divination, right? Again, the question is not what is so and what is good in general, but given that I have this project, what will happen to it? How can I best achieve it? I would describe this as kind of a question about the relation of project to context, which is to say, I've got something I want to do, get rid of my toothache, go hunting, attack these guys, and I want to know how the world's going to respond. I want to know if the world's going to pick up my project, go along with it, join in, rally around it, or going to push back against it, right, and thwart it. So I have to have this relationship set up between these two. It's focused, of course, above all on my desires or my project, right, or it's given its shape by that. Yin now, as it was, you could say in the Tao Te Ching, as context, the background to a coherent, light, valued, emergent thing. But now the explicit reference to the desired thing, right, comes back with a focus on the structure of divination. And what we get as a response to that is a yes or a no, an auspicious or an inauspicious, initially, a sort of go ahead and do it, or a stop, wait kind of answer. This is what I'm saying is really the kind of proto-yin-yang structure, those two elements, right? A yes versus a no, and a project versus a context. Yes, meaning the world will respond by facilitating, furthering, joining in, continuing the proposed trajectory. No, meaning the world will resist it or be so unresponsive to it that the project will fail to grow. And there's an important word, how to think about growth. Project, flourishing, proceeding, picking up nutrition and elements and growing, will continue or will die. So here we have change starting to be in the context of a project requiring a context, reinterpreted as growth. It's there in the Taoist approach in a way, but here we have that project-context relation as sort of a prototype for growth. I'll just read this because I see my time is getting a little short. The proposed project wants to grow. That is, it wants to expand from a thought of a possible action to a series of actual events and effects in the broader world, broader sphere of the world. It wants other elements to rally around it, to join in with its project, to provide it with resources and energies for expanding its range of application. This way of thinking about, I'm going to go hunting. Is world going to give me stuff to make hunting keep going, continue, expand, quote unquote, succeed, right? Or is world going to say no animals here, or another hunter in the way, or something, or bad weather, something like that, right? I have some remarks here. This is kind of irrelevant, but you might, the philosophically inclined might want to note this. This transformation from possible to actual need not be conceived here as a modal change, possible, actual, in the sense of the categories of Greek metaphysics, but instead merely as an expansion of range of application, from inner to outer, from hidden to seen, from constrained to expansive, from isolated to shared. The changes the project undergoes, this is all ways of addressing that radical change problem in terms of a notion of growth or development. The changes the project undergoes in each stage of the process may be huge, but that is because the range of its relationships is changing hugely. Given that its characteristics are always context dependent, as the very question formation of the terms are, reliant on its specific relationships, it is natural that the expansion into subsequent contexts will also change its characteristics, sometimes quite radically. Okay, so rather than sort of reaching for potential versus actual when we think about the fulfillment of a project, I'm suggesting maybe we have some model more like this. Really, at every step, it is fully actual rather than mere potential, but it is an actual that is context dependent and therefore constantly transforming. Okay. So another step here, we're talking about growth, and we're talking about project context as a metaphor for that, and divination as a model for that. And now we want to also talk about the way yin-yang is brought in to talk about generation, and this idea of growth linked to generation and generation linked to reproductive metaphors. The question of continuation and growth of the project against an initially qualitatively contrasting context, so dark to light, right? That was the old Tao Te Ching model, but that's also the I want to go hunting model that's now brought in onto that, remains central. But now it is supplemented with an interest in origins from a qualitative contrasting context. So these two dimensions, it's a little confusing, but I think you see it clearly in the Tao Te Ching, right? You have two different kinds of relationships to the not this, right? One is, there's light and it is valued over, it is prioritized over, rooted in, right, the dark or whatever those yin categories are. But there's also the beginnings of things, right, where things begin. They begin in what they are not, whatever it is they're identified. The name begins in the nameless, the being begins in the non-being. So it's not, that's a little bit of a different picture, right, from the divination picture, which is, I don't really care about the origin. I'm not even asking about why I want to go hunting or why the world is how it is. I'm just asking, are they going to have a love connection here? My wanting to go hunting and the world accepting my hunting, right? But now this is related also to problems of generation. The questions about origin that arise in this will focus not on the origin of the world, but the origin of situations that come and go, of which an origin is observed and is relevant to someone doing fortune telling. It's not just sheng, it's what will later be called sheng. So this is from the Shizhuan of the Zhouyi, right? Generation and regeneration, not once and for all generation. In the way this is framed for yin-yang purposes, there's a marginalization of the mineral world, I think, due to its relative stability. You don't see the mountains come into existence, so nobody really worries about that factor in I'm going hunting over in that area, right? But you have a question about how things presently come to be. Priority, therefore, of vegetable and animal growth, because we continually see them coming into being, getting born, right? Plants grow, plants sprout, plants grow, animals are born. And those two dimensions, animal growth and birth and growth, and vegetable birth and growth, are sort of the matrix that we now further stream this yin-yang image through, right? On the one hand, we have seeds in soil for vegetable growth, and especially sky and earth, right? And light and dark, as the sky side has this process of generation of the seen from unseen, this temporal diurnal process. Also hot and cold, but I'm focusing on the seen-unseen relationship. You have days emerging from nights. They have to be coordinated in measured alternation in a certain way. There's a relationship between them that we need for the generation of plants, right? And we need a relation between heaven and earth, between sky and soil for that to happen. And with animals, we have sex. And of course, these are the sort of light-dark, male-female kind of motifs within yin-yang. They're sort of, if you don't put it through this question about generating plants and generating animals, it can be hard to see what light and dark, male and female, like what's those are two completely incommensurate sorts of metaphors. But I think they both circle around this question of growth that we're getting into as we push back into the divination problem. Why? Because both of these are easily assimilable to the project context model of divination. The project, or actual thought in my head, wants to grow as a seed wants to grow. It asks if the soil of the world will thwart its impulse or nourish it, encourage it, join with it, further it. You have these images of yin and yang, or chen and kun, as shi and chang, beginning something and completing it, right? Like conception and pregnancy and birth, right? Or like seed and growth and harvest, right? That sort of a picture. A seed is an incipient project. The soil is its context. Sexual reproduction, now also conceived in this way, against the privileging of the stillness and emptiness of the womb, or female in the Tao Te Ching, as the true source of generation. So the void of the womb, the nameless, the mysterious female in chapter 5, the gate of the mysterious female, the vagina. It now begins with the qian, vigorous, filling presence of, quote, male activity, therefore continued and completed by the womb. So there's kind of a, you could say, an Empire Strikes Back thing going on here in the yin-yang, if you look at it from the point of view of the Taoist, right? Just in the way yin is now reconnected and it's maybe arguably subordinated, but at least, deprived of the kind of absolute dominance it's given in the Tao Te Ching. In the yin-yang system. Both of these types of reproduction or generation require a conjunction of multiple factors with no apparent single intentionality to control them. And this sort of, I'm trying to connect back to the point about mythology as focusing on purposes, intentions, agency, and things like that, right? These are a little bit off agency. Sexual reproduction is, right? It doesn't really work through making consciously of something, and growth too, right? As we often see, you can think of Mengzi 2A2, right? When he's talking about pulling up the sprouts, right? You don't really grow things by just making them grow. You have to let them grow. So there's a kind of diversion off of direct intentionality and control in both of those forms of generation, which I think is important. And so we're now starting to get around to the factors that are cohering into this idea of yin and yang. A little bit on, I'm not that far from done, don't worry, the evolution of the hexagram. If we start with a divination as a kind of yes-no thing, right, and you can have a broken or an unbroken line, an emptiness or a fullness. We could talk more about various theories about the evolution of the actual figures in the Zhouyi. We have a way of now, as we complexify into sort of the Zhouyi and then into the Bagua, the 8 trigrams, and finally into the 64 hexagrams, a way of diagramming both the project and the context. But this is an expansive motif. Every project context is the project within a larger context. In other words, you have this internesting structure. So there's, a thing in its context, and that totality is then the thing in another context, right? They have that kind of expansive picture. And there's a way in which these old fortune-telling diagrams can rather smoothly be used to rethink that. I think because we have these sort of synchronic and diachronic structures already in it as just a straight-up fortune-telling book, right? It's not just, as a project context thing, it's going to have a focus on a progression. I'm here, I want to do this thing, I want to know the outcome. So there's that kind of a progression, right? A kind of mini prospective potential or possible narrative that is going to want to see prior and subsequent sort of states, but they fade very quickly into incoherence, right? That is to say, it's not relevant, as I said, to get a structure that is stable for the entirety, because the way the question is framed is entirely dependent on what I'm trying to do right now, right? So we get multiple possible transitions of each of these synchronic but mainly diachronic structures of projects and contexts to other situations. And you can think about the I Ching, for those of you who have spent some time with it, the way we work through inverted hexagrams, reversed hexagrams, where the yin and the yang reverse valences, the changing hexagrams, right, where we will suddenly jump to another one that has a special relationship this time because of an instability in one or another line or piece in the structure. And then the Shugua, right, where you have the sequence of the 64, and it's very interesting, right, in the sort of mythology that you do have around the I Ching. What do sages need to do? They need to put these in the right sequence, right? This is what Wenwang did And this is, they're all there already, but what really matters is how to put them together, right? And, you can get that wrong, but you need a sage to really know what order to put them in. However, the order you put them in gives you a structure, but that is not what the sequence of reading is going to be in a given situation when you're doing a divination. You're going to start from whatever gua you get, and that's going to link, jump up to some other things. Another interesting thing you end up there with is a finite number of these 64 permutations in a closed system, but at the same time a kind of maximalized internal combinations and connections among them. So it's not literally infinite, but it is sort of effectively beyond anything you can sort of see from any one place how these things will connect. It's closed, but it's intricately internested enough that it is effectively unending. And this is important because the Taoist sort of be sure this, that, sure, fei kind of problem is really unclosed. Okay? They're literally unclosed. There's no way to close it, right? Any attempt to close it will just be another positing that will be negated, right? So something very actually subtle has been done to address that here. Closing the circle, we have this, we're getting back to sort of the containment of Taoist relativism. Closing the circle, a finite range of contexts necessary to contain the drift to total relativism, where you have a functionally relevant way of making a judgment of what is right or wrong or better or worse in a given situation, but never a global judgment like that, right? A functionally unlimited number of contexts to glean maximal flexibility, hexagram system, a kind of elegant solution satisfying both of these opposed demands. So I'm trying to read here yin-yang as kind of a response not just to the privileging of yin in the Tao Te Ching, but to the this-that relativism of the Qiu Lun through global contextualization within this kind of tricky system that's inherited and is structured along these contours defined by specifically by the divination problem, okay? Yin and yang, then, in that way, are just a minimal assertion of there is something intelligible there trying to maintain and extend its coherence, to grow, to develop, as we say, against a background and from a background of what it is not. Not to be thought of as first principles that are controlling anything, but rather the lack of any such principles. This is the inheritance from the Taoist side. As the law of averages is the lack of any law, a name for the structure of any coherent activity, a name for the lack of any constraining actual set of rules. Resistance to an overriding order of mutually consistent laws. And anyone, by the way, there's another very interesting thing about the I Ching for those of you who've played around with it, right? There are a lot of rules for how to read and interpret lines in the hexagrams, right? They have to be xiang-ying, and they have to be zheng, right? And they have to be the relation to the adjacent line and the relation to the corresponding line. But those rules are mutually inconsistent, right? In other words, you can't apply all the rules on every case. So which universal rules apply in any case are not determined by the rules. They're determined by the case, right? And that's what a sage judges when he writes his commentary. He looks at this case and says, well, we don't care about xiang-ying, about response in this case, because this other thing overrides it, let's say. We could talk about it in terms of overriding. Okay, so again, I think that's at the very bottom of this slide, you have a line from the Shi Zi Zhuan, which is, I think, also really significant, right? 唯变所示不可谓典要, right? Which is to say, the transformations simply go where they go. No essential norms or rules can be made of them, right? And yet, not total chaos somehow, right? Not the Zhuangzian chaos, right? And I have some things here. Mythology repurposed produces monolithic, sort of God-steered religion metaphysics. It's a speculative remark. Divination repurposed produces godless, immanent transcendence of cosmic process, of generation continuation. So no consistent rules, but not chaotic relativism. So look at this. I think if you look at the Shi Zi Zhuan, you'll see very specific and pointed, responsive to precisely these kind of Taoist worries. I'll give you a couple of examples. These two maybe are sufficient. So the first one, also from the Shi Zi Zhuan, about language. about language, linguistic skepticism, right? So here we have Shu Bujin Yan, Yan Bujin Yi, right? I have a translation. Writing does not fully express words, language. Language does not fully express meanings or intent, right? So then, is the sage's meaning impossible to see? You can link this to things in the Zhuangzi about the wheelwright and things like that, right? Whatever's left in books is just dregs. You can't really see what the sage intends. That point is accepted and repurposed, you might say. They don't contest that point, right? Language doesn't get the sage's meaning. Does that mean we can't express the sage's meaning? No, because we've got something else, something better. You know what it is? Hexagrams, right? So, and then Confucius says the sages established images to fully express meaning, set up hexagrams to fully plumb what is true and false, attached commas to fully realize their words, transformed and interconnected them to fully realize what is profitable, and then the best one, right? 古之武之以尽神. So, drummed and danced with them to fully realize the numinous, the spiritual, shen. That's playing with the hexagrams, reconnecting them, configuring, messing around with them, okay? That's how you can get the meaning of the sage. What did the sage do? First of all, he added some comments. We've got those. They're traditional. They're canonical. And so you want to see what the sage meant. Don't read, a discourse. Certainly don't read a narrative myth. Play around with the hexagrams and what the sages said and which rules they had apply in each particular case and which rules they ignored in each particular case, things like that. So a kind of middle alternative to both speech and silence, right? Through hexagrams, the images, and then the commentaries on those images and structures. And then I think maybe even more crucial and really, I think, incredible, profound sort of subtle point is here made, which I read as sort of a direct response to something like Tao Te Ching chapter 5, Tian Di Bu Ren. Heaven and earth are not humane. They treat all things as straw dogs, right? The sage is not humane. He treats all the people as straw dogs. That's Tao Te Ching. Here in the Shi Zi Zhuan, you have this. Yi Yin Yang Zhi Wei Dao. Everyone knows, maybe a lot of you know it. Ji Zhi Zhe Shan, Cheng Zhi Zhe Xing Yan. Which is to say, one yin, one yang is called Tao. To continue, for some reason I didn't put that translation in, but this is crucial, actually, right? To what continues it is the good. So, yi yin yang is not good, is not ren, per se. I know we have many arguments about this among Neo-Confucians about how to read this, but I'm just trying to read this text in the context of it as a response to the Tao Te Ching. Okay, so there's Tao and there's the continuation of it. What is the good? It is the continuation of Yi Yin, Yi Yang, right? The continuation of the relation, the generative and growth relation of project context, of generation and growth. And what completes it is Xing, which I take to be human nature, and as you can see from the bottom of the slide, this I take to be in line with what comes up in the Shuogua, not in these words, but the trinity of man, earth, and heaven, right? Which is now read as built into the structure, the sixfold structure, a yin-yang, 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 of the hexagrams. And we have it explicitly, sansai, jian sansai, or liangzhi, there in the Shuogua, right? So humans' role is to do good and thereby complete Yi Yin, Yi Yang, right? Continuing it, although it itself is indeed not Ren. And how do we know this? But what is its relation to Ren? The text continues, Ren zhe jian zhe wei zhe Ren, right? The benevolent, the humane see it and call it humaneness. The wise see it and call it wisdom. The people use it every day and don't know anything about it, right? Don't know they're using it. And then the key line, Xian Zhu Ren, Cang Zhu Yong, which is to say it's manifest in Ren, most clear, most seen, I take that to mean, and hidden in all those Yong Bu Zhi, all the functions of the ordinary people, the Yong, the Zhouyi. So that Zhu is doing double duty there. So indeed, Tiandibu Ren, heaven and earth are not humane. And yet, when the humane look at it, they think of it as Ren. And though they're strictly speaking wrong, still what they get from it in that way is what is its most clear, its most direct manifestation. It's a very subtle distinction, right? But a very important one, as you can see from the next line, which is, it drums forth the 10,000 things, but does not share the worries of the sage. So as against the Tao Te Ching, which says, Tiandi Bu Ren, and therefore Sheng Ren Ye Bu Ren, right? This says, Tiandi Bu Ren, but Sheng Ren Dang Ren. Ren, right? The sage is Ren. The sage does worry. The sage is moral. And that is his way of continuing the amoral process of the Tao. Okay? Okay, I'm getting to the end of the time here. I just have 2 more slides, so let me just quickly whip through this. I said I was going to come back to the supposed either Confucian elements that were influenced by the I Ching in one reading, but which could also be viewed as sort of rediscovered in the wake of this development. So these are there, definitely there in the Lunyun and the Mengzi. These ideas of timeliness and contextualism. I guess I won't go through them. Many of you know all these things. And growth metaphors as cultivation metaphors, process metaphors, things about hierarchical structures and pairings and so on, right? I put this as a question, right? Is this a reason for the privileging of divination over myth? In other words, that you do have these elements, these kind of, maybe even sort of partially sources of streams that led to their radicalization within Taoism that were there, always there in Confucianism, and which could be highlighted or further consolidated, or even in retrospect became more prominent after this particular solution, the divination, was hit upon, or maybe the reason why narrative wasn't going to do the job. These things would not fit in as well to the sort of global, stable structure, more like a Moist structure, right? Or politically a legalist structure, which says Tian has a plan, here's what's good and bad, we can determine it, no problem, here's the standard, do it or else get punished, straight, simple, right? You have elements in early Confucianism that resist that, and you would say strongly resisted in the way Mengzi responds to Mozi, let's say, right? And so this would be one reason why maybe, again, that's totally speculative. More maybe philosophically interesting, this is my final slide, is to think about the status of teleology in the result of this sort of complicated historical process, whichever way we conclude it actually unfolded. So going back to the beginning there, this system, the divination, and then the sort of philosophicized divination system and metaphysic that evolves out of it, and many different ones do, but they have certain things in common. System starts with this structure that presupposes that we come to it with purposes already in hand, and is meaningful only in that premise. It does not generate or prescribe these purposes. It doesn't really even ask where they come from, right? It just sort of assumes if you're coming to the oracle, you must want something. You see this sort of motif in a lot of places, right? This is like Mengzi ke yu zhi wei shan, what is desirable is the good, or Xunzi saying, being alive is having desires, right? You can't question further back than that, right? It's just a fact. So you're going to have desires, and there's not much said about those, right? Those are like the condition of possibility of the system working at all, right? Rather, it describes a world of constantly changing purposes working with constantly changing situations. These purposes change constantly and are of endless variety. As such, it seems unable to generate or prescribe an overall purpose for the entire system of change or the changes. So this goes back to Yi Yin, Yi Yang, Zhi Wei Dao, right? There's no purpose to it, and there's no goodness to it. There's no teleology to it. In fact, this is a much, much longer and more complicated argument to make. But I mean, as I said in passing, to say yin, yang is just a way of describing the most basic structure of just something being there. Not prescribing a particular function or initial condition that things have to accord with. I know that will be controversial in some quarters. But what I think is going on here is it inspires a kind of profound breakthrough, the teleology that is indistinguishable from a teleology. That's really what I want the takeaway here to be. You have to go through these complicated steps. What do I mean by that? Sheng, not life. That sheng is not life. It's yin, yang. It can be life. Okay? It's generation of a situation, of an intelligible state of affairs. Elsewhere, I've talked about this in Zhouyi, which I allude to at the very end here, right? When he's trying to, of course, you can divide these in various ways, but this wuxin zhixin or tiandi zhixin, when Zhouyi talks about that, and when he talks about sheng, you'll see that he'll allude to things like when you burn some rotten wood. Someone asks him if wood is rotten and dead, does it still have the sheng? What's the shenging of that dead wood? He says, well, if you burn it, it has a certain smell. That's sheng. All right? Sheng ain't life, right? It's just something happening. It's just things not stopping. It's just continuation, right? It's just the continuity of a continuation, growth continuation. But you realize that means that the only goal there is not reaching an end. Things continuing. In other words, having no telos. The facilitation of ji, zhizhe, shanya, right? Of coherence and continuity of change itself. The only goal is not stopping the lack of any final goal. One yin, one yang is Tao. Here's where I have the translation. To complete it is the good, to complete it is the role of human nature. So, wu xin zhi xin. So, that idea is very worth exploring in its own right, but if you're interested in trying to put together how such a thing came to be, this is my best stab at the moment of trying to think about how those pieces came together. I welcome your comments and questions. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Oh, here we go. On. Anyway, myth, for instance, myth is very different in China versus Japan and Greece, right? Writing comes in and you get a snapshot of what's going on then. Whereas writing and myth develops at the same time. There's transformation. History steps in, fills in some of the parts, so forth like that. So that's very simplistic, right? And then in terms of divination, I think we have two kinds of divination going on. One of which can be consulting an authority, which is Jiaguwen. Seems more like that, right? Mm-hmm. There's an idea, there's something that's going to tell him, right?
Yeah.
And then in later popular stuff, you're talking to dead people, Guanggong, and all kinds of things like that. So that's not very useful for philosophy, right? So, But the I Ching is very, very flexible, right? Because it's all about interpretation, and it's very, not only the kind of things going on that you mentioned, but either individual lines are old or young. Yes. They're about to change. Yeah. So it's not a snapshot you're looking for. It's to some extent where you're going, right? It's very three-dimensional.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's a very interesting point about the development of mythology and writing. Two points. I want to just sort of respond to both of them. Yeah, I mean, there's sort of two ways to look at that, right? Like, yeah, you have mythology existing on a sort of oral transmission level, probably, and then writing coming in and being but the other factor of that is when writing does come in, it's the monopoly of a very, very, very small number of people, right? So the question then is, what do those people, so that's another way to question it, right? I mean, I don't know how to calculate those numbers, but were there more people who had access to writing in Greece and Japan when, at any given time? But whatever it was that class thought was important is what we get in writing, right? So And yes, you'd have to factor in the availability of resource, how much writing gets to be done, right, and who gets to do it. So I think I tend to look at it as the two things that's related, right, which is to say, why did that class of people who knew how to write not care about this enough to write it down?
Right. Well, anything that gets written is privileged.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And so what gets privileged is the stuff you got there.
Yeah.
In that
Exactly.
sense. This is a mythology. We're going to write it down. We're going to keep it.
Yeah.
Whereas the Chinese say, maybe not.
Yeah.
That stuff's too weird.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. And the other point, that's one way to think of it. I'm not sure, and this maybe is subject to, maybe we could just... yeah. No, but I mean, to divide divination into two types, I guess I've been kind of assuming that there's a kind of transition that goes on. That because, in other words, that the divination system can access, like, yes, you're talking to ancestors, somebody's responding, but it's already sort of sidelined just in the structure of those kinds of things, and it's a sort of one-time relationship with that guy. It comes and goes, right? So, and I would say, so it's even possible to me, maybe the I Ching was initially also thought of as having someone, you're a way of relating to Shema Shen, right? But I guess what I'm trying to say is that either way, it doesn't matter, right? There's something in the structure of that fortune-telling as opposed to the narrative myth that is going to tilt things, that is open to being sort of repurposed this way.
Well, the I Ching presents a system.
Yeah, that's right.
Guanggong doesn't give you a system.
That's right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Thanks. Other thoughts? Questions?
Thank you. So I didn't have time to formulate the question. So you pointed out this issue of Taoist relativism and how to contain it. And the thing that has the grounds too, there are about 64 permutations, it contains it. I was wondering whether you came across any discussions on limitations or in terms of like countability of yan, speech, words, right? Because there was a slide where there was a skepticism about what writing and speech can accomplish, and then the hexagrams, it's kind of an answer to that. Did you come across any discussions on whether there was this perception of yan being limitless, just like
limitless?
Yeah, like speech being limitless, and that also kind of. I was thinking of more specifically, so the issue of writing speech and what we can express, because another way to answer that is to say goblet speech in Zhuangzi, right? That also is an answer, and it's a middle way between silence versus speech. And instead of goblet speech, we have hexagrams.
Yeah.
With goblet speech, it's limitless, and also there is no like authority on who can use it, right? It's endless in some ways, whereas with hexagrams, it's contained in terms of enumerations, also in terms of monopoly over who can interpret that. Sages can interpret what commoners use, but they are too stupid to understand.
Yes.
So going back to my initial question, did you come across any kind of discussions about yan being limitless in terms of the number of words? Maybe it's like 10,000, but it's just a way of describing it's like many. Or maybe they lend themselves to different kind of usages, which is like uncontainable. And so hexagrams kind of contain relativism maybe on like multiple ways, multiple layers.
I think my sense is that one of the other ways in which the containment happens here is to put to good use the existing interest in traditional authority, right? So who disambiguates the hexagrams? Who judges? Who does the judgments, right? And who puts them in order? Who makes a system of them, right? It's a sage king, or it's a sage, or it's Confucius, right? And so there's this massive there's possibility, but there's an ethical act and a tradition, right? And there are comments right there in the sheets of Zhuang, like oddly enough, right? One of the very first sort of commentaries, you get in the sheets of Zhuang when it just devolves into sort of random remarks about different hexagrams is about language, right? And it's about, you got to be really careful what you say, because one word out of your mouth is like a steed that will, run away and ruin everything. So the constraint is an ethical one, and sort of one that, is exemplified by the sages' reticence or economy of words, what they withhold and what they don't say, right? And then of course they're just disambiguating all the way through. So I think that's part of the way in which, okay, there are infinite things you could say about any hexagram, but the hexagrams and the 7 things that the sages say about them are going to express the sages' meaning in a way that neither the sort of real infinity of an unexplained image or just endless words could do. Sort of something like that.
So the seen, not seen kind of business,
Yeah.
people might think that there's a barrier line between the two. But it's really about whether you can see the stuff in between.
Yes.
So there's very minute stuff, right?
Yes.
And then there's also where you're looking
Yes.
too. And so just a crude kind of idea is that Zhuge Liang figures out he's going to die not by looking at his heart or nothing, but at the stars.
Yeah.
So the idea is there are places you can look, not everybody's going to look, right?
Yeah.
So there's stuff that can be seen, those who are subtle enough in themselves to be able to see this stuff.
Yes, that's a good point. And I mean, I think that connects somewhat to, the local and not global nature of this kind of enterprise, right? So when you say seen and unseen, you don't mean like there's things that just by their nature are not seen. It's just what you can't see right now, right? So, and as you move along, you're going to get a shifting landscape. But there's always going to be a seen and an unseen, right? And that's where I think the sort of, even the Tao Te Ching sort of intervention comes in. Yeah.
Hello. Hi. So the word that you translated as good is shan, right?
Yeah.
Could that be like the same sense as like shang shan ruo shui, like in the a kind of like adaptability rather than like a moral good? Because it's paralleled with nature, right?
Well, right. Well, I think its parallel to nature probably is a hearkening back to kind of Mengzi and Xing and Shan put together, and then of course linked right there to Ren and Zhi in the next line, which are also Mengzi, the bookends of the Mencian virtues, right? So I tend to think it's meant in the moral sense, and therefore, I mean, you could say skillful, right? But I actually think that context suggests that it is directly addressing the question of the Ren or not Ren of Tao, right? And so, it's just sort of context dependent.
Okay, thank you.
I ask this question from true ignorance. I'm not a sinologist, but on my amateur understanding of history, of Chinese history at this period, one of the premises, if I understand it correctly, that that doesn't fit with what I know. With what I know is that perhaps this is an oversimplification, but it sounds like you were saying there is a tendency to eschew mythology in the late Warring States period in favor of divination. But on my understanding, isn't it during the 5th and 4th centuries BC that the Zhuozhuan is being compiled, and that Confucians are taking the Chunqiu as being a canonical text, and Mencius is also interested in origins and what would be sort of at the border of mythology and history? Isn't this central to Confucianism?
Well, I mean, in the broad sense, as I said, there's stories about how nature came to be, pretty much none, right? Very few, right? You get a few trickling in around that time maybe, but doesn't seem to be the interest. So not origin stories. There's some interest in the origin of cultural institutions. So you have the Ziporyn and elsewhere, how writing got invented and so on. In that case, trying to sort of pump up the importance of it. because it's saying they thought about these hexagrams and they got these ideas. But these are kind of pushed back. So, and I mean, the mythology in the Hmongzi, I mean, if you're going to say the mythology of Yawen Shun, right, the Sage Kings, yeah, that's a story about a state of the world in the past, for sure, right? But it's not really even about the origins of even the rituals, right? I mean, they're as sort of a single source thing. They're looking around, they're looking at various patterns, and they sort of get focused in one point, and somebody else adds more in the next generation, and so on and so forth, right? So, you know, there's obviously big interest in the past, but it's not really an interest in sort of a sharp beginning before which there was nothing. There's sort of these gradual continuities that develop. In the case of the Zhuangzi, I mean, there's a lot of stories, right, in the Zhuangzi. Some of them seem clearly to be derived from, you know, let's say like a myth of like the pure man in the mountains, or the right, who lives on dew and wind, things like that. There's that kind of myth. We call that a myth, right? But that's different from an origin story or kind of a narrative, right? There is this other thing going on linked here, right, which is marvelous and surprising in some way, right? And has some relevance that we can invoke. But I don't actually see a lot of that kind of philosophical interest in origins per se until the Dao De Jing and Tai Yi Sheng Shui and things like that, which I would say is sort of a generation down, right, after Mengzi. I don't really see the Mengzi. And by the way, see what Mengzi does to, you know, even the accounts in the Shangshu, right? He'll say like, I don't believe. It's better. Yeah, it's better to have no tradition all of them to believe all of it. So you definitely have this kind of like, you know, rethink going on about the past.
I was told that we are out of time. So one more question, and then, yeah.
Hi, Brook. It's been a long time.
Yes.
Yeah, my question is, okay, besides the I Ching, there were zillions of other divination systems, especially with the calendar.
Oh, yeah.
You know, with everything, dreams, there were systems for interpreting dreams, there were systems for understanding medicine. The calendar, though, is one of the big ones. Stem avoidance, there's, you know, do this on such and such day, don't. The diviner's compass, there were all kinds of systems with the diviner's compass. And how do those all fit in?
Yes.
I mean, I see a lot of I Ching here, but I don't see anything about everything else.
It's a great question, right? And David alluded to this too. There's all kinds of, right, the role of divination in traditional Chinese culture is actually huge. Maybe unusually huge. So I would guess, you know, that's maybe part of this. Some of those same features of divination that I mentioned before are part of that picture, right? The context specific, the premise, the framing in terms of a sort of particular project context sort of thing. I think those apply in all those cases, but none of those were taken as the basis of a philosophical system, right? No one wrote a Shizi Zhuan to the calendar in the same. Well, in a way, someone did. Actually, Yang Xiong kind of did, right? The Tai Xuan Jing kind of is that, maybe, you know. But it didn't catch on. But I mean, that would be as we would expect, right? That someone would say, you know, there's a deep significance to this way of thinking about the way the calendar works, right? And you know, that's exactly what he did. He did his own I Ching, for those of you who aren't familiar with that work, right? But he paired it to the Han calendar and made it into 81 specific forms with his own kind of diagrams. But, you know, there's a million different divination systems. Divination itself is important, and one of them got systematized, got sort of rubber stamped by sage attention in a way. I think there's kind of budding versions of that for other systems, which you'll see in a kind of actually, I think you would see, you know, like the Yellow Emperor's, you know, commentary on the, how to choose your name, the character for your name, or the numbers and stuff like that, right? And some system developed. So you could say that tendency, I think, is more widespread. But this one caught on, and that's sort of what I'm trying to get at. Like, why was this one useful for these philosophical debates, maybe to a unique extent, right? Particularly the one that interests me, I guess, but which I see as central, is this sort of encounter with these sort of troubling Taoist motifs that the philosophers were obviously worried about. Yeah.
Please join me in thanking Dr. Ziporyn for his talk.
Thank you.